She is considered by many to be America's wonkiest TV anchor. Rachel Maddow is a political commentator, author, historian, host of The Rachel Maddow Show Monday nights on MS Now, the recipient of Emmy Awards, and the producer of various podcasts. Her most recent podcast, Burn Order, is about the U.S. government's decision to incarcerate 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, many of whom were U.S. citizens, following the attack at Pearl Harbor in 1941. Rachel Maddow, thank you for joining WBGO.
Jay, it's great to be here. I love that. I love what you're doing here, and I'm such a fan of yours going back through many iterations of your life. So it's really nice to be with you here today.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is a favorite hobby of mine. Um, I recall maybe the first time I was on the Rachel Maddow show.
Mhm.
Um, I was at the top of the hour, and I was sitting maybe an inch off camera, and you said, "Don't say anything. I'm going to give you a warm up first." And the warm up proceeded to take, I don't know, 10 minutes. I think it may have with a stagecoach in the 18th century. And I had to cough, and my mic was hot. So I held my breath for 10 minutes, looking forward to the first question. So anyway,
If it
um,
was, I have to say, if it was at the top of the show and I only talked for 10 minutes, that was me being very disciplined because
okay,
usually it goes on
okay.
even longer than that. Yeah.
So from your commentary on your show that I've listened to for years, I know that you are an historian. And I'm sure you would agree what John Meacham says, history tends to rhyme.
Hmm.
And that those who don't know the mistakes of history or don't learn from them are bound to repeat them. I'd like to ask you why you decided in your latest podcast to highlight the story of the internment of Japanese Americans right after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Um, well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. I think of myself as sort of a history buff more than a historian. But it came from a couple of personal places and a couple of intellectual places. Intellectually, I had just done all of this work in my previous podcasts, Ultra, seasons 1 and 2, and a book that I wrote called Prequel about American fascists in the lead up to World War II and how the government at the time contended with Americans who were really overtly on the other side, who didn't just want us not to fight World War II, but wanted us to fight with the Axis because they admired fascist Germany most of all, and also fascist Italy, and to a certain extent, arguably fascist Japan. So I had been interested in that subset, that kind of weird, ultra conservative part of American extremist politics at that time, and through that policy, through that sort of study, I became aware that the fascists really weren't interned. They weren't incarcerated, while every Japanese American, citizen or not, was. And I was interested in how that decision making was made. So I started sort of following that and found some documents that I didn't think anybody else had reported on before. And that's the goal. That's what you're going for. Um, also, I was interested in naval intelligence having been really different than other law enforcement and intelligence agencies at the time. When um, Jewish groups and other activist groups in the lead up to World War II were monitoring the fascists and fighting the fascists and tracking them, they couldn't get the FBI interested. They couldn't get local law enforcement, for the most part, interested. Really, the only law enforcement or intelligence agency they could get to do anything with this intel they were getting was naval intelligence. And I didn't really understand why that was. Turns out there was a really charismatic, interesting senior naval intelligence officer named Ellis Zacharias, who I came across in part because he later had an NBC TV show where he talked about his exploits as an intelligence officer. It was a really weird show, and I came across that. I also learned that he spoke Japanese, which was a strange that didn't really fit into anything. When in the lead up to the atomic bombing of Japan, he broadcast. They sent radio broadcasts of him speaking Japanese into Japan, trying to convince the Japanese to surrender. I just thought, how do all these things come together? naval intelligence ends up playing a really important role in the Japanese incarceration policy. So I went, I sort of got those two back doors into the story, and then personally, I think you know Chuck Rosenberg, a former Justice Department official. He had actually lobbied me, had written me this really interesting sort of pitch saying that Mitsuye Endo, who's the one lone woman among the four test cases of the incarceration policy, she had never been honored by a president the way that the three men had, Korematsu, Hirabayashi, and Yasui. And Chuck had been teaching about her case in his law school classes and thought there should be some storytelling around her. We should understand this. And I think he was concerned that President Biden was going to get to his end of his term and never honor her. And ultimately, actually, President Biden did. He gave her the Presidential Citizens Medal. But Chuck coming to me with that, saying, "Hey, I think there's a story here for you," was really moving to me just because I felt like he trusted me with the story. So it came to it a lot of different ways, but lots of different reasons to tell this story now.
What is the phrase burn order a reference to?
One of the elements of the sort of legal thriller at the heart of the incarceration policy is that the Army, sort of despite itself, accidentally memorialized in print their real thinking about why they wanted to incarcerate all Japanese Americans, down to, babies. They got babies out of orphanages because they were a national security threat because they had some portion of Japanese lineage. And um, what they memorialized in print was that they viewed Japanese people as an enemy race. And that even if you had all the time in the world, the Japanese as a race were so inscrutable, it was impossible to do any sort of individuated justice. That they essentially, Japanese people should always be excluded from the protections of the Constitution because as a racial group, their racial characteristics were such that they could never be trusted with constitutional rights. And that, I believe, really was the motivation for the policy in large part. And they should have never written that down. And when they wrote that down, a very smart lawyer in the U.S. government named John McCloy, who was the Assistant Secretary of Defense, saw that and said, we cannot allow the Supreme Court or anybody to see this, or our policy will get shot down and we will be tarred and feathered. And he and the colonel who wrote that agreed that the way they would make this go away is that they issued a burn order that all copies of that report should be incinerated. And I won't give it away, but the burn order was only partially followed. And so that's how you get to the
Right.
thriller, the sort of chase
Right.
at the heart of this. Did you know, I mean, the Korematsu precedent, obviously one of the
Yes,
world's experts on U.S. military law. Did you know that whole scandal about
I did not.
McCloy's report? Oh,
I
yeah.
reread the Korematsu decision by the Supreme Court, which I first read in law school
Yeah.
in preparation for this interview. But I did not know that particular episode. Rachel, one of the things that is most striking about the majority opinion in the Korematsu case, Korematsu was one of the detainees,
Hmm.
is the deference that the Supreme Court was willing to give the U.S. military right after the attack on Pearl Harbor. What the majority basically said was the military says that some people of Japanese ancestry may be engaging in espionage, sabotage here in the United States, and there are a whole lot of them, and we can't figure out which ones are innocent and which ones are guilty, so it's okay to lock all of them up. I mean, that was basically the fundamental logic behind the decision, right?
Well, yeah. And the refusal, the overt refusal to interrogate the military's reasoning or conclusions at all. I mean,
Right.
they say in we must defer to military authorities, which okay, like I can get there intellectually, but then when military authorities are doing something that is very, very radical, and the evidence that they were providing, we now know it was just bluntly false. It was lies that
Mhm.
the government and indeed the army knew was untrue information. That sort of blind deference only works on paper, and in reality, it was a moral and strategic catastrophe. Um, and for me too, the involved. So it's the army that it's really two officials in the army who are the driving force for the policy, and they are certainly inflected by their own racial prejudices and by the politics, particularly of California, where there's a lot of racial animus against Japanese American farmers from other farming groups that are competitive with them and want their land. Like they're all subject to those feelings and those wins while they are making their supposed military determination about this stuff. Um, but it's the Justice Department, the Solicitor General's office, knowingly withholds from the court the exculpatory information they have on this question of Japanese loyalty. So they know the FBI and the FCC and other agencies have investigated all of these claims that the Japanese are disloyal, and they have their own determinative sort of controlling intelligence findings in the military that says we definitely should not lock everybody up as a group. They're a great asset to us. Any question of loyalty can be determined on an individual basis. They've got all of this exculpatory information that's all contrary to what the military's supposed determination is on this. And it is wrong for the Army to have proceeded despite knowing that there was no factual basis for what they were doing. But it was really wrong of the Justice Department to knowingly refuse to provide that stuff to the court when they should have. And this is as much on the Justice Department's head as it is on the military's. That said, I mean, the justices themselves could have done better work in that Korematsu decision, and they didn't. And I mean, just the way it's written, Black's opinion is repulsive. The language, I think, is at least to me as a non-lawyer, just reading it today, it's just repellent language.
Yeah. I was struck by several lines in the dissents,
Hmm.
one from Justice Murphy. Such exclusion goes over the very brink of constitutional power and falls into the ugly abyss of racism. Pretty strong stuff for 1942.
Yeah.
Justice Jackson, if any fundamental assumption underlies our system, it is that guilt is personal and not inheritable. Also, pretty strong language for 1942. So, Rachel, question I have is, where did FDR fall on this policy? He's regarded as one of our two or three greatest presidents. Was he an active advocate for this, or did he go along passively because the military says so? Or where does your research tell you he fell on all this?
It's not good for FDR, but it is a little bit of a black box. It actually, there's a really good book that was published in 2003 by Greg Robinson called By Order of the President is the title. And I think Greg Robinson gets as close as anybody has to really determining FDR's personal culpability for that policy. Certainly, FDR was a real racist about Japanese people. He actually was kind of a Sinophile. He was he admired the Chinese very much, and of course, the military history between Japan and China. If you were a fan of China, that probably made you hate Japan. But he went beyond just in terms of admiration for them culturally or even militarily to racist caricatures of Japanese people in the way that he talked about them even as U.S. citizens. So that's for real. And then there's this other, I mean, I don't know why I get so hung up on the evil that you can hide in lawyering. As a non-lawyer, I don't know why this is my thing, but
Uh-huh.
there is this one really, I don't know, this piece of it that nobody else seems all that interested in that I just can't stop thinking about, which is the Attorney General at the time had started out being opposed to the policy, and his top people working on this at the Justice Department were opposed to the policy. And the Attorney General caves, and once FDR tells him, this is the policy I want, he just drops all his opposition and stops for arguing against it. And I think Francis Biddle has a better reputation than he deserves, given what he did there. But in a situation that really resonates for me with a lot of what we've seen in the Trump era, the Justice Department is full of lawyers, very able people, very capable people who can do any number of things. And Not a single person in the Justice Department will write an opinion saying the policy is legal. They will. Biddle would like to be able to do that. He wants to now enable FDR's decision to do this. No one in the Justice Department will sign off and do it. And so
Mm.
mysteriously, there emerges from outside the Justice Department a memo saying, oh, yeah, this is all legal. And it's written by non-DOJ lawyers. It's written by other governmental lawyers who are good New Dealers and good liberals and end up being pretty famous. Benjamin Cohen, Joseph Rao, Oscar Cox. They write this memo. Nobody knows the origin of the memo. So everybody who's writing about Francis Biddle says Biddle asked for it because he couldn't get the memo that he wanted from his own department. Um, the Justice Department lawyers who are mad at Biddle about him caving say that these outside lawyers just volunteered this memo on their own volition and they shouldn't have done it. But the lawyers themselves who wrote the memo, at least one of them, Benjamin Cohen, says or implies that FDR asked for it directly.
Ah,
And if FDR asked for it directly, then we are in a position where he is not just sort of racistly inclined to do something like this, and where he is not letting the army do whatever it wants without him interrogating this terrible thing they're going to do to our Constitution and our country, but he is actively papering it to make sure that it can get through. And that, to me, feels like a deeper circle of hell morally. But again, I care about these things in those ways. I don't know that anybody else cares about that part of it.
Was there a particular episode that broke the back of this policy, or did it just die a slow death?
Um, Endo's case made it impractical to keep going. So at the same time that Korematsu is decided, Endo is decided. And the Hirabayashi case and the Minyasui case, those are both curfew. And the Korematsu case is obviously famously the Korematsu case and everything that it contains. Mitsuya Endo, is decided on the same day as Korematsu, and it actually goes her way. It's a unanimous decision that she cannot be incarcerated.
Hmm.
And they find that the way they're able to find for her while they're finding against all the guys is that in the case, the government conceded that she was a loyal citizen. They had no evidence of her disloyalty, and there's no reason to think of her as a national security threat. But she must be locked up anyway because of this policy. And so that really called the question in a very fundamental way. And one of the little pieces of intrigue here is that a lot of people believe that when the Endo decision was going to come down, which made the policy untenable, they somebody at the court appears to have leaked it to the White House before the ruling was handed down. And so the ruling came down, I believe it was on a Monday, and the day before, which I believe was a Sunday, I think those days of the week are right. The Army suddenly announced, well, we're closing all the camps. The policy's over. And so the Endo decision then comes out the next day, which effectively says you have to close all the camps. The policy's over. But it looks like the court did not force that on the government when they sort of did. And so Endo's case is important, and the intrigue around it is really dramatic and interesting. But the policy was also disgusting.
Yeah.
And I think within the Roosevelt administration, people had broadly soured on it. Harold Ickes at the Interior Department had increasing responsibility for sort of part of the government that was administering this, and he was really outspoken against it. I think that helped. Japanese Americans also just palpably they're years into being incarcerated. The elderly, men, women, children, infants. I also thought I think it became morally unsustainable in terms of people just not being able to justify the way they were being treated.
What is the broader lesson of history that applies to today's events, today's policies, today's government, in your view?
Well, I'll warn you in advance. I'm going to turn this question around to you and ask you what you think, just having thought about it, even for this discussion. I mean, for me, the part of this that I find really, really haunting is the Japanese Americans, the previously incarcerated Japanese Americans who I talked to for this podcast and for this work, who have not in the back of their mind, but sort of in the front of their mind, the fact that no non-Japanese Americans protested against
Mm.
this, that their white neighbors um, lined up to watch them get taken away on the buses and the trains. That in some of my research, I spent time in the National Archives looking at the handwritten records that were created at these offices where people are supposed to check in and get their numbers for being shipped off and relocated. And I found phone messages from people in my town where I grew up in Northern California, people calling the offices saying, "Hey, I'd love to get my hands on a 1.5 ton pickup truck. Can I get one cheap?" Or I'd like a nursery, or I'd like a beauty shop, or I'd like a farmhouse. And it was non-Japanese Americans who were trying to take advantage of the fact that their neighbors were being taken away. And that moral failing to me is something that I can't live with. That can't, when the government does anything like this, I want us to be a country where, however long it takes to stop the government from doing it, there is at least outrage and protest and human efforts to mitigate this stuff, not the people joining with the government in victimizing our fellow citizens on this kind of a basis. So for me, it's just very human, moral thing. But what do you thinking about this in terms of the way this translates to today?
So you'll be interested in this. I'm in the midst of writing a lengthy law review piece on presidential war powers.
Ah,
And part of my research is to interview members of Congress who voted for the 2002 AUMF to go to war against Iraq,
yeah.
based on a mistake, based on a mistaken assumption of the intelligence about WMD. And they basically said it was the time in which we were asked to vote right after 9/11. Our constituents were saying, go get the bad guys. I don't care about the differences between this bad guy and that bad guy. Go get them all. And it was very much the climate then that we lived in. You remember it. It was people were scared about anthrax. They were scared about 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the arguments linking Saddam Hussein to Osama bin Laden somehow appealed to certain people who didn't stop and really think hard about the question. And so uh, our government can do some really horrible, scary things in the wrong type of political climate. And it's in those moments that certain people have to stand up and say, wait, stop. I loved the speech that Senator Robert Byrd gave in
Mm-hmm.
opposition to the war in Iraq. An
Mm-hmm.
85-year-old crusty conservative Southern Democrat who supposedly was a member of the Klan at some point, who gave this very morally coherent speech on the Senate floor about the case for going to Iraq had not been made. He was immune from the politics, and so too often we succumb to fear, suspicion, um, and the prejudice of our constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in that sense, history will continue to repeat itself.
I also think it reflects a sort of a cowardly faithlessness with the Constitution. I mean, this idea that if we um, uphold both the letter and the spirit of the Constitution, we're suckers who aren't protecting ourselves or who aren't being tough enough,
Yeah.
implies that the Constitution is a strategically unsound commitment that we made. And I just don't think that's true.
Well, one of the very last lines in the dissenting opinion in Korematsu was this: the chief restraint upon those who command the physical forces of the country in the future as in the past must be their responsibility to the political judgments of their contemporaries and to the moral judgments of history.
Hmm.
So basically, what they're saying is the president's this all-powerful person, and we have to depend on the president to be wise and responsible and have a sense of history and take his oath seriously.
Yeah, you better be careful about who you pick.
Yes, right. So here's the question I really want to ask Rachel Maddow. Um, we're in the midst of the second term of an extremist administration. The American people elected this not once but twice. How did that happen? Why did that happen? What is the mood of the country that leads to the election twice of a Donald Trump?
I mean, bottom line up front, I don't know. I don't know. And I also think that maybe a diagnosis would not be a prescription for a cure. And so I don't know that it's no, this isn't, we can't talk therapy our way, our way out of this one. But where I have looked for answers over the past 10 years or so that we've been contending with this branch of American conservatism, and it's real it's takeover now of not only the executive branch but our attempted takeover of our system of government and our constitutional republic. One of the things that I've looked to is other times when we've flirted with or been threatened by movements like this. That's why I started working on American fascism in the lead up to the Second World War, mostly because I was struck by how powerful that movement was and how well connected they were. We kind of wrote them out of history, but when you go back and you look at contemporaneous sources, we had a really big fascist movement in this country that wanted us on the side of the Axis. So that's one. But I've also looked at other countries that have thrown away or frittered away or fought for and lost their democracies to authoritarian movements. And I think you do see patterns. I think that, you see violence encroaching into what ought to be civic and political space, and that makes it hard for regular people to get involved fearlessly in politics. I think you see scapegoating of minority groups, either racially or immigrant groups or people who are defined some other ways, as being not just responsible for everything that's wrong in the country, but somehow mysteriously they have superhuman powers that mean that we can't contain the threat from them by normal means. We need to ditch the Constitution and go after them using extreme measures. You see the politics of truth get really weird, and I know that sounds kind of woo woo, but you start to get people saying, like don't believe experts, don't believe journalism, don't believe science, don't believe anybody who tells you anything that you don't want to hear. You can only trust things from me. You see that assault on the idea of objective truth, and then ultimately you see tinkering with the machinery of democracy. You see that the process of voting and expressing your views in political ways gets piece by piece dislocated from the question of who is actually in power.
Mhm.
And through voter suppression, through gerrymandering, through ultimately the contesting of elections, and the takeover of election machinery. You see all those four things moving in the same direction, and you get authoritarian overthrow. And it happens to the best of countries. And I think we are the best of countries. And we've got a 250-year-old republic, and it's breaking at the seams under the pressure from those things. And those things have happened to other people, and they've happened to Americans at other times. And we need to learn from both other countries and from our own ancestors who fought those things in order to keep this. I don't think that Trump is magic. I think that we are as susceptible as anybody in any other generation or any other country to the things that make people susceptible to the sort of siren song of authoritarian control.
Will there be a return to normalcy, or is this the new normal in your view?
Jeh Johnson, will there be a return to normalcy? Do you think that we've fundamentally broken some stuff that we won't get back, or do you think we can come back?
Um, so I look at the Pew Research Trust in Government study
Yeah.
and get really depressed.
Mm.
In the late 50s, early 60s, Americans' trust in government to do the right thing was in the 70 percentile rank. Now it's, single digits possibly, or 15, 20%. So I think that says a lot. I also believe that in politics, there's a pendulum effect.
Hmm.
Uh, we go from Dwight Eisenhower to John F. Kennedy. We go from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, but then we did this, very dramatic swing to Donald Trump. But I do believe there's a pendulum effect to American politics, and by 2028, most people in this country will want something very different.
Hmm.
Um, in politics, a year is a decade. So that's my hopeful belief about our country. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. That's my
Do,
answer.
do you think that there has been some authoritarian breakthrough, as they say, in this second Trump term in particular, in which they have essentially broken the Justice Department to use it as a political
Yes,
tool? They have broken the Pentagon to a certain extent to try to use it as a tool of force against the American people. They have broken the electoral system in a way that they'll be insulated from the expressed view of the people, that they'll be able to stay in power regardless of people's political preferences and our behavior at election time.
yes, all of the above.
Yeah.
Um, all the legal and constitutional norms that you and I grew up with have been shattered and will continue to be shattered. We're only 1 year into this administration in its
Hmm.
second term. And one of the things I think we are discovering is there's a lot of gray in our Constitution. For example, the First Amendment is only 42 words
Hmm.
in a semicolon, but it embodies the principles of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly. And so, for the life of this nation, our democracy has depended upon electing people as leaders who understand and are willing to observe constitutional and legal norms, as well as the explicit words. And when you elect someone who has no sense of history, no sense of legal or constitutional history, and is determined to burst through all of them unless the Supreme Court stops him, we are where we are.
Yeah.
And that's and we're only 1 year into this. So didn't mean that as a political commentary, but just an observation of what I think is reality.
And it's a really important thing to understand because if what you were talking about earlier with the pendulum, if the pendulum in terms of Americans' political preferences swings against this, if that doesn't manifest as political change because we're no longer allowed to choose to replace our leaders, um, that's it's a really fast end to the republic. It doesn't mean like, oh, this is going to wither now and we're not going to be as good a country over the next couple of decades. It means we start losing it next year and it's gone in 3 years, unless we can protect 2026, unless we can protect 2028. It just makes
Well,
it really, really, really urgent to do that.
I'm going to be an optimist. You did a program a while ago where you highlighted Andrew Young.
Yeah.
Andrew Young was a guest on this show.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and he was my graduation speaker from law school in 1982.
Nice.
And I remember one thing he said, which I always repeat in commencement addresses: in your lifetime, you will see and do things beyond your current comprehension. And
Hmm.
he was absolutely right in 1982, because in 1982, when I finished law school, there was this other student at Columbia University with an African first name named Barack Hussein Obama, who was going to be the country's first black president, and I was going to be in his cabinet running something called the Department of Homeland Security. And I never could have gotten my head around any of that. And so this country keeps surprising me in a lot of ways. And I tend to be an optimist. I hope you are too.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what side of the bed I woke up on, but I have a lot of I have a lot of faith in our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly, our freedom of the press, um, and the consequences of using those things. And all of those freedoms are under threat, but all of those freedoms, I think, are deeply and intrinsically understood by the American people as being sources of incredible power.
Yeah.
And so, whatever crimp they try to put on those rights, I don't think we're going to take it. And as long as we are using our free press and our free speech and our freedom to assemble, we can still control our fate.
Okay, so I want to close on the fun part here, Rachel. This is a classic R&B radio show. Yes,
As you can tell from this discussion.
And who are your favorite classic R&B artists? I'm sure you have some.
I do have some, I'd say I'm an Aretha Franklin fan all the way. I listen to Aretha Franklin multiple times per week, every week.
Okay. All right.
So I am a major Aretha Franklin fan.
The moment I wake up, before I put on my makeup, I say a little prayer for you.
I also have some like individual songs that are really important to me that I go back and back and back to. Like once a week or so, I use we have one of those sound systems in our house where you can, like from your iPad or your phone, you can put the music on and you can pick what room it goes in. We've one of those, so don't just have a record, but we have a record player, but we have one of those systems. And if Susan's in the kitchen or if Susan's like up in our art studio or something, I will just about once a week put on Bobby Hebb, Sunny, and just surprise her because it starts with that drum roll, Sunny. And it surprises her and makes her laugh every single time I do it because I always do it out of the blue without warning her.
Sunny, yesterday my life was filled with rain. Sunny, you smiled at me and really eased the pain.
Change is Gonna Come is a regular road trip song.
There's the Sam Cooke version and the Otis Redding version.
The Sam Cooke version.
It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will.
But I think that my preferences are more on the jazz side than on the classic R&B side. So I definitely have the crossover. My favorite song of any genre of all time is Hymn to Freedom, Oscar Peterson's Hymn to Freedom, which I think it's not a soul song, it's a jazz song, but I'd put it right there.
Well, this is primarily a jazz radio station, so you just made a lot of listeners very happy.
If anybody ever within the sound of my voice has to produce a soundtrack for something related to me at some point, please buy the rights to Hymn to Freedom for that occasion.
Okay. Rachel, I'm going to end this interview the same way you tend to end your interviews. Thank you for your time.
Jay, thank you for your time and for doing this. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, my friend.